Welcome to Running Your Stories. I'm here again with Martin, back for a second episode to tell us about his latest exploits. So what have you been up to, Martin?
So I've just finished a race called the Pennine Bridleway Ultra Challenge. So this was 270 kilometres that started at Middleton Top in Derbyshire and went to Kirby Stephen.
Cool. 270 kilometres. Let's put that into miles for the
168.
168 miles. I always have to cover both because, you know, we're young guys, we work in kilometres and metres, but a lot of the old people out there like miles and feet, don't they?
Yeah.
Even ones who are younger in years, still older in age. Yeah. So 168 miles. So is it single stage, multi-stage?
So it's a 100-hour cut-off, and there were 3 checkpoints that you can rest or sleep at, but only 2 of them have sleeping space.
Cool. Yeah. So if there's 3 checkpoints, that's a good distance between checkpoints.
Yeah.
It's around, near enough 100k between.
So I think the first one was 58 kilometres in, and then there was one at Hebden Bridge and one at Settle, which obviously you're familiar with a lot of the route from where it crosses over with the Pennine Way.
Yeah.
So yeah, the being able to sleep at Hebden Bridge and being able to sleep at Settle was where you were planning on most of your rest. You could only rest for up to 4 hours at checkpoint 1. But it being 58 kilometres in, 4 hours would be a long time to be faffing around at that point. Yeah,
well, again, like you say, to sleep for that long at that point would be difficult. To faff for that long at that point would be quite easy. So I believe it was a new event.
Yeah, this was the first year it had been run.
By Ranger Ultra,
yeah.
Is that right? I see. I do have some memory, and that's Stu Weston, is it?
Westfield.
Stu Westfield, yeah. I was getting names mixed up. I'm terrible with that. So, how many people on this inaugural event?
So there was initially 9 according to SI entries, and then 7 showed up at the start. So yeah, I think it was quite a low-key event for the first year, but they've set a capacity for next year's event at 40, which I think would be good if they could get close to those sort of numbers.
Yeah. Yeah, so what, again, I'm familiar with large parts of the route myself, but just to let other people know, what kind of terrain is it?
So the vast majority of it is on trail. There is the occasional bit where you have to go on the road for parts of it, but I think the way the event's organised, they do try and keep you on trail just for safety, compared to if you're on a road late in the middle of the night with a back torch and a head torch. It's not really ideal if you can be in a safer place on trail.
Yeah. So again, the type of trails there, the fairly low technicality, and certainly undulating, definitely not flat. Yeah. But I don't think it's mega ascent either, is it?
I think there's around 7,000 metres for the full distance.
Yeah.
But like you said, there's none of that that's scrambling or anything too technical.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess for comparison, the Spine Challenger, which is 108 miles, that's 5,000 metres. So it's similar kind of amount. The Lakeland 100, which is 105 miles, that's 7,000 metres. Yeah. So it's not as hilly as the Lakeland 100 because it's a longer distance. Yeah. But it's similar to like a Spine Challenger kind of hilliness. Yeah. Yeah. I guess one of the differences with the Spine Challenger, potentially, we'll find out, you have to carry a lot of kit on that. What's the kit requirements like on this?
So I was quite lucky that there's a reasonable proportion that you can leave in your drop bag. Yeah. So the initial kit list of what you have to bring is quite exhaustive, but it's up to you what you choose to carry while you're actually moving.
Okay, I like that idea. Yeah, because again, doing things like the Spine, you end up with stoves and sleeping bags and bivvy bags and goggles and ice spikes. And I've often thought, particularly the ice spikes, you can very clearly look at the forecast and see if there's any chance of you needing them. Yeah. And there often isn't. And I have thought a few times, it would be great if I could just leave them in my drop bag. Completely agree with having them available at the event. Yeah. So what's the kit that's optional to leave in your?
Broadly similar. You could leave your stove. You could leave. I think you had to make sure you had some insulation, but they weren't too picky about if it was the winter weight stuff or if it was a mid layer.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the sleeping bag and the sleeping mat, if I'd have been made to carry those, that would have been a bigger impact in terms of the bag I choose to buy and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, because again, like I said, sort of relating it into spine stuff. When you go up to that, like fitting in the sleeping bag and the sleeping mat, even when you go with the really expensive stuff, you still end up with then a bigger bag, and so the bag weighs more as well. Again, even if you're really buying the really expensive lightweight stuff, you're still going up in weight on your bag, and so everything really starts to add up. So, what was it like for water along the way?
So you had to carry something that could hold up to 3 litres, but obviously they're not pedantic about it having to be full.
Yeah.
There was plenty of places where you could top up en route, and I was similar to what you do. I'd have the electrolyte tablets that I could put into the water, so that was nice. I could carry something that weighed next to nothing to be able to use them. Yeah,
no, that sounds again, as you say. Recently, there hasn't been a lot of rain, but actually, the main streams and sources that are clean enough have been flowing fine. I'm slowly starting to learn more and more where there's springs and stuff like that as well. There's one by Studley Pike, but I don't think the route probably went up there.
I don't think it did.
No.
I remember seeing it and being quite glad we were going round rather than going up.
Yeah, it's quite steep up there, but there's a really nice freshwater spring up there that's very safe to use.
Yeah, so I think that was towards the end of the longest leg out of the 4. So I was quite glad to seeing that off in the distance, and that we wouldn't necessarily have to go all the way up.
Yeah. So, I guess talk us through it a little. How did it go for you?
So I think I'd put a lot of nervous energy at the start into trying to not go off too fast. So my watch has a heart rate feature that I've never raced with before, and I was conscious of it not being too high, but again, not looking like I'm coasting. So the first 58k, I think my heart rate was around 146 for that leg, which isn't going, like, my max is 210. It's not going too far into dangerous territory, but obviously it's not something I'm going to be able to sustain for the full race. So I think I found trying to slow down a bit on subsequent stages and accepting that I was going to be doing them right through the night either way did help. And I think based on my watch for the full race, it did even out a lot, so it wasn't as high for the full thing.
Do you know what it evened out to?
120.
Yeah, that's... So yeah, I can relate to that. Mine's lower because I'm older. My max heart rate's from more like 180 rather than 210. So obviously all the other levels come down as well. But yeah, that's certainly, I think, everyone's experience with the really long stuff. At the start, you can push your heart rate really high, but as you get more and more fatigued, your heart rate limits itself, and that's kind of the maximum you can go to.
Yeah.
And so, which for me would probably be 100, 110, which is still, I can actually move pretty well at that heart rate. But, like you say, it just kind of settles down and limits really what you can do later on. So no, it's a good strategy, limiting it early on, because otherwise you get the build-up of lactic acid and everything else, which then really eats into your muscles and causes you a lot of issues.
Yeah, I think it helped as well that there were people that I could run certain sections of the course with. So I had a bit of a minor admin error that caught up with me on the first night. So I'd accidentally bought the wrong size batteries for a head torch that I've owned for 6 years. So luckily, the guy I was running with at the time stayed with me until we got to the next checkpoint. We ran through to race control, and they basically said, if he stays with you, you can stay in the race. If he chooses to go on ahead, you're out. Yeah. So luckily, he saved my race and stayed with me for the rest of that night. My mum put a message out on Facebook asking if somebody could get some Triple A's to the Hebden checkpoint. Somebody dropped off 3 packets and wouldn't take any money off my mum for them, which I thought was really nice.
Yeah, that's really cool. Again, community sort of coming through. Yeah, like you say, it's a kind of a tricky thing with things like that. Obviously, I think we're all familiar with having to have head torches and spare batteries and even spare torches and things for is mandatory kit. But at times, equipment fails. You could accidentally lose batteries or accidentally bring the wrong size.
Yeah.
These things happen. So that sounds like a very reasonable response from race control, actually. That, you're safe while you're with that other person, therefore they'll accept that. If you were to separate, you're then unsafe, so they have to pull you from the race. So it seems a very fair response.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was one of those that we were both moving very comfortably. It was the first night of the race. I think if that comes on night 3, it's possibly a different decision for them if we're moving a lot slower.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. And like, again, to hear the community rallying around and getting you the batteries and things, it's one of those things you never want to expect it, but you kind of always know it's going to happen because people are great.
At the end of the day, there would have been somewhere in Hebden Open that I could have gone and bought some and come back, but that's adding into time that you don't want to be using, and it's nice to get there, know that the batteries are there, and you can sleep for a little bit before starting the next leg.
Yep. Yeah, definitely.
So the guy who had ran with to that checkpoint, we both agreed that we'll take as much time as we can at Hebden because Settle feels quite far away, and then we set off together for the next leg. So it was quite good that we'd sort of tried to make, because I think we'd worked out that even though he was faster along flats, I was probably slightly quicker at climbing, and we sort of evened out pace-wise.
Yeah.
He was very good in terms of he knew exactly what stuff he was taking when we were leaving each checkpoint, and was quite good at when we were trying to navigate together. We wouldn't take much time to make a decision, and we managed to make sure that there wasn't any decisions that were overly wrong. So we were able to correct mine and our errors pretty quickly.
Yep, that sounds good. So we're just getting disturbed by my running buddy. Come here. My dog, who's just been playing with my son. He's just come to tell us that he's come in from running around. He's off again. So if there's panting in the background, it isn't somebody else from the family, just the dog here. Oh, he's decided he's going to be friends with Martin now. He's finished growling and barking at him. We'll let you come into the video arcade because you're going to be far more popular than what we are. Right, lie down then. So we'll better talk a little just for a moment about Arcade's running. So he's 18 months old now, so I've been starting to build up his distance. About 2 weeks ago, he did his longest run yet, which was about 19 miles.
Oh wow!
Quite a reasonably, relatively flat route for the kind of things I usually do, with lots of stops off at streams and rivers to make sure he could drink and cool himself off and what have you. But he really loves running.
What was he like for food in terms of being out that long?
It's a very good question. I carry food with me. He's actually learned now that when it's starting to affect him, he asks me for food. He runs alongside me and nudges my hand with his nose, and he's conscious of it himself. Which we're kind of building that like relationship and partnership where I can tell when he's kind of slowing down and needs some food or if he needs some water, and he also when he sees water, I mentioned to you earlier that he likes to run off and swim, but he actually looks at me and asks for permission first. Yeah, he tends not to just disappear off. He'll look at me and wait for a nod or a shout of okay or go swim. And then he'll charge off at top pace to get to the water. When he was very young, we took him on one of his first like really long walks, or not too young, but his first long walk. I noticed like 2 days afterwards, his weight kind of dropped down a bit, and talking to Sabs about it, who's a vet. She said, "Well, you've just got to feed him more," and both. I feed him more beforehand, so he's got more in his system, carry food with us and then feed him more afterwards as well. And now, even at that 19-mile run, he was tired for a couple of days, not like wiped out tired, but a bit more tired. His weight didn't drop at all, which means I'm getting it right. I've been learning that, and he's been learning, and we've been building up the distance slowly. It was interesting to see on the weekend that I've just been on, there were people doing like 3 days in a row with their dogs, and I got chatting with another guy who's a vet, and he had some concerns about how much that affects an animal that can't tell you how he's feeling it. Doing 3 days in a row of sustained effort. I haven't actually done back-to-back days or anything with arcade yet.
I suppose even though they can't tell you, they can vote with their feet, can't they? That if they decide to stop and not go anymore. Or do you think that's not an option?
They get too excited by it.
Yeah.
That's the danger.
Yeah.
They're so excited to be doing it. They will keep going beyond the point where it does them harm. So you got to be very careful with that with dogs. So yeah, I'm trying to learn these things, and we know ourselves when we're building up distance. You go for that bigger distance, and then you back off and have some rest. So again, I've been doing the same with the dog, where when we do something bigger distance, his next few days will be much quieter.
Yeah.
And I'll see how he's responding on his normal walks, and is his energy back before we do something else. And if his energy's back after 2 days, that's not so bad. If it takes a whole week, I've obviously pushed them too far.
Yeah.
And it just, but it's interesting watching that, where you can't have the conversation, because essentially I'm coaching my dog to become a runner, but I can't ask him, well, how do you feel? Because he literally is a coiled spring. He'll be asleep on the sofa, and you'll say, shall we go for a run? He'll just jump up. That's it. He's ready to go. So yeah, like you say, you got to be very careful with it. But he's coming on well.
And imagine the weather at this time of year will be a lot safer than if it was in the dead of winter as well.
Yeah, but also actually in the heat of the summer, you've got to be then even more careful about how much he's drinking, because again, there'll be less water in the streams and things. Yeah. So I think that the first time I ran sort of 5k with him, I took him around Scammon local reservoir, but again, kept going down to the water so he could actually get into the water and cool down, like fully cool down, make sure he didn't overheat.
Yeah.
That was my concern then, because that was last summer. So.
In terms of the dragon's back, there is a favourite advice that the human equivalent of that can be quite useful if it is really hot.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And I've both done it myself and seen other people doing it, where you're just submerging your whole body in some cold water. Obviously, always be careful how you enter cold water. Be aware of cold water shock. It is a real thing. I have experienced it, so I know what it's like. But yeah, like you say, cooling, it's trying to get your core temperature down. Yeah. Because I had that on the Lakeland 100 last year, where it was so hot, and then trying to run in that. Once the temperature started coming down, my core temperature still hadn't come down. I was still sweating profusely, even though it wasn't hot out any longer. Yeah. And I'd slowed down, which just really showed that my core temperature was high.
How did you manage that with layers and stuff?
I had a very thin, lightweight t-shirt on. So there was nothing else I could take off. No. So yeah, that was kind of the issue. Once you've stripped down, where else do you go? Yeah. Yeah, very thin, baggy, lightweight t-shirt, and just to try and protect myself from the sun, but allow my body to breathe as much as possible. Yeah. So anyway, now that the dog's decided he's going to go and lie down somewhere else, let's get back to your story. So you're he's coming back now, isn't he? Got into Hebden, had a good sleep.
Yeah. So I think the guy I was running with going into that checkpoint, he was quite he was probably feeling slightly stronger than me going out of that checkpoint. So he went on ahead partway through. There wasn't really much of anything between checkpoint 1 and checkpoint 2 that I found too difficult. I was particularly pleased that there's a long climb just before you descend into Settle, that trying to keep my heart rate down on purpose. So I was really pleased to have that around 90 for what was probably a 2 or 3 mile steady ascent before the last mile or so downhill. Yep. I think a lot of the food that I'd taken worked out quite well, that there wasn't ever a point where I was thinking I don't want to have that and being sick of everything that you've got in your bag. And the navigation side, that was definitely the easiest of the 3 legs. So the difference between going right through the night, the first night, and then this one was, you sort of knew that once you got into Settle, there was only 1 leg left, and psychologically, I think in a lot of races, if you know you've left the last checkpoint, unless you're injured, it's very unlikely you're going to go back into it.
Yeah.
The sleeping facilities, have you been to the Hebden Hay scout centre before. Yes. Yeah, so it was quite nice actually having a proper bed and not having to get out a camping mat and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, so you were saying that the food you took worked for you. Yeah. What did you take?
So I think it was 16,000 calories I'd worked out that I'd bought from the local Morrison's to take as making sure I had enough. So I had trail mix and yoghurt rice cakes and chocolate rice cakes. I think almonds and cashews I didn't decant into smaller bags, which I probably should have done. So they ended up coming back with me at the end. But yeah, it was stuff like sardine malt loaf and things that you can easily just sort of take out of the packet and have, I found really useful. And the food at checkpoints was really good as well, so things with salt in, and yeah, having actual meals where it was you could stay, that was really nice.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. Yeah, what I found with the nuts, because I really like nuts when I'm out doing long stuff as well, is I stick them in the blender, chop them up, and make them into energy balls. And so because one of the things you sometimes got to watch with nuts is how much you chew them, because you don't digest most of it. You know, if you're swallowing big pieces, pretty much come out the other end again.
Yeah.
And therefore you haven't got those calories that you think you've got. Whereas when you stick them in the blender and they get chopped up into small pieces, it's actually done a lot of your chewing for you.
Yeah.
And you can sort of get them in. And I keep promising people to do I've actually done videos about how I make my energy balls, but I haven't edited them to put them on YouTube, which I need to do. Cause,
I found small amounts of sweet things as well massively boosting psychologically. That a 100-gram block of dark chocolate was something that you'd really look forward to, and having a handful of them in the overnight bag was good to work out. You didn't necessarily have to think, if I take one on this stage, I can't take one on the next stage.
Yep. I just realised your microphone has dropped off. It looks like the clip's broken. Let me help you out with that. I think I can just clip that onto there. Like that. That'll work.
Yeah, I was a bad vegetarian for one stage where I had a Haribo Tangfastics that was particularly nice as a one-off.
Yeah, I think that's probably a very small deviation from being vegetarian.
It was quite interesting as well having the conversation with other runners about what they were taking. So somebody had like various different meats that he would occasionally have, and it was. I don't know how people managed to carry so little. So the guidance was, if you were taking a stove, you had to carry 1,000 calories that you could eat straight away and 1,000 calories that you'd have to prepare.
Yeah.
Or if you were not carrying the stove, you just had to carry 2,000 calories between jet points.
Yeah.
I was always erring on the side of at least having some emergency food if I needed it left.
Yeah.
So I quite like the idea that if nothing goes wrong, at least you know that you've got something to take into the next leg.
Yeah, that's right. Because I mean, again, I've had the experience on these long races of getting injured, and then you start hiking instead of running because you're injured, so you're slowing down, but you're not stopping, and you're then out for a longer period of time. So what you might think is an 8-hour leg becomes a 12-hour leg, or a 12-hour leg becomes a 16-hour leg. And in fact, I had that the weekend just gone. The Sunday, I was expecting to be about a 10-hour day, turned into nearly a 12-hour day. And you see, if you don't carry that extra food, that longer day becomes really a big strain on your body, and you can get into a big deficiency if you run out of food and you've got nothing for the last 3 or 4 hours. So I agree with you. I mean, there is a compromise somewhere along the lines of trying to keep your kit as light as possible and not carry too much. But I think when you're doing this really long stuff, unless you're there thinking you're going to break the course record, maybe you need to take some more risks there. But because again, if you get injured, you're probably more likely to quit anyway. But I think for people like ourselves, I'd definitely recommend to take that extra food. But it's also, as you say, when you get it right, it's all things that you're happy to eat.
Yeah.
What I don't think any of us like is when you're carrying stuff and you're looking and you think, I don't want to eat that, and then you're carrying it the whole way and you don't eat it.
Yeah.
And you've got no chance of eating it because you've completely gone off it. Yeah. That's definitely a waste.
I think a lot of the nutrition I could take in through fluids as well, having in the back of my mind that I was doing that. So all of my water had electrolytes in, having the little packet of salt sticks that weighs nothing, but psychologically having a couple of those convinced myself I wouldn't get as cramps during the race.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, it's something that that I've moved over to in the last couple of years. Like you say, is having electrolytes in all my water, carrying electrolytes with me, and it's making a huge difference. I drink more because of it, because I used to get to a point with plain water where, and actually I think it doesn't just feel like it's just sitting in your stomach not going anywhere. It actually does just sit in your stomach not going anywhere because you haven't got enough salt for osmosis to take place, and so the water just sits in your stomach, and then you start feeling sick because it's just juggling up and down. Yeah. Whereas when you have the electrolytes in it, it just keeps going into your body, which is where you need it. So, yeah.
I think from a water retention perspective, the amount of weight that I gained during the race took me by surprise. Right. So, yeah, I gained 2 kilos from when I set off to when I'd finished.
Did you have any swelling around ankles or things like that?
Yeah, my feet were in a bad way, so I think that could possibly have been it. There was a lot of, because obviously when you're sleeping, your body will sort of even out if you're lying flat, and I hadn't been laying flat for quite a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, because, well, again, it's something that I found, certainly the first couple of times I did like 100-mile distance. It was definitely the very first time. I got massive swelling around feet and ankles. And like you say, it's just because you're vertical for so many hours. But even this year, doing the spine for 5 days on my feet, I had less swelling than I did on my first 100-miler. And I think your body kind of gets used to it. I was swollen without a shadow of a doubt, but as you say, that swelling puts like huge amount of fluid into those areas, and I think that's where some of the, like you say, sort of weight gain comes on, because you're carrying, it's kind of like having bags of water strapped to your ankles.
I was thinking, in terms of where it's a race you've done more than once, do you think part of that could be an economy in your running style compared to when you'd have first done it, or if you're hiking rather than running?
It's definitely a mix of those things, but also I think, like when I did my first Challenger, the first time I did 100 miles, I was so unprepared for it, as in the amount of training I'd done, the amount of time on my feet and distance I'd done before that. It was probably about 60 miles in, my body just went into, I have absolutely no idea what's going on here. I'm just going to swell up and try and protect everything. Yeah. And it's something your body does when it gets to that level of, this is just beyond anything the body's done before. It does start to kind of swell up in a crazy way. Yeah. It doesn't sound like you were that bad. No. But, so somewhere along the lines, when your body keeps getting battered and you keep asking more and more of it, it just kind of goes into this protection response and starts to swell up.
Yeah, in terms of my first 100 miler, there was no point at all during this race I felt as bad in terms of cramps and feeling like I couldn't move forwards.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing how your body gets used to it, and it's something else we were talking about just earlier on, about sometimes when you go into these really long distances, you feel fairly, if the first one works smoothly for you, you feel fairly invincible, and you keep geting faster and faster and stronger, and sometimes you're building up problems that catch up with you later, maybe 2 or 3 years down the line. And I know a lot of people that have experienced that, where you kind of felt like, I can do another one, and it's it catches up with you sometimes. But it definitely sounds like you must have done a good amount of training. Your body's got used to doing long distances, and so it doesn't feel battered, doesn't feel broken. I'm sure it feels tired, but
I think what possibly helped as well with the winter that we had, because there was quite a lot of storms that I'd ran through, and where the terrain is more boggy at that time of year. Yeah. This might have been in my head, but having where it feels relatively dry in comparison during the race, you don't necessarily think that it's going to be as difficult, even though it's like a longer stage than anything you've done in training.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for that as well. As you say, just being on having the terrain easier than expected, or easier than what you're used to, also will make a big difference. Which again, we're talking about doing things like doing fell races is preparation for doing a trail race, because you've been on that more technical ground, that harder stuff, and then you back off that and do the longer distance, and it kind of makes it a bit easier. So.
Yeah, I think the experience of having started the Dragon's Back last year and getting to the end of day one, that helped in terms of there was nothing throughout the 3.5 days of this that was anywhere near what parts of day one of the Dragon's Back was.
Yeah, and I also know, certainly last couple of years, you've done a lot of like ascent in your training as well, a lot of it. And with this one, you know, I guess it depends on your background. For running around here, it's kind of a sensible amount of ascent. Some people would see it as a huge amount because it depends what you're used to. But I guess I know from your training in the last few years, this was not a lot of ascent because you were training for the Dragon's Back and things like that. And so to go into this race with less ascent, again, I think it's that equivalent thing of, you know, you've trained for tougher terrain, for whether it's more ascent or more technical, and then when you kind of step back onto something smoother, more runnable, a bit easier, just feel nice.
Yeah, I think psychologically knowing the cutoff was 100 hours for this was a big boost. That there wasn't any point where I thought, unless I get injured, I should be able to get round and not have too much of an issue with being too far into the last day.
Yeah. So I guess we're getting towards that. So how long did it take you?
77 hours. So I was quite keen on finishing at some point on Saturday because I didn't want to have got into the territory where I'm doing 2 nights without sleep.
Yeah.
And pacing wise, it wasn't ever really a risk as long as I didn't take too long at the Hebden and Settle breakpoints.
Yeah. So, well, I guess you've gone through more than 2 nights, 77 hours.
So it was around 3.5 hours to 4 hours that I'd slept at each at Hebden and at Settle, and that seemed to be enough in terms of the adrenaline of being still in a race environment. And like I said, the guy who helped me through the first night of going into the Hebden checkpoint, I was quite keen to at least leave with him and not be dragging up, staying on my own.
Yeah. No, from what you're describing about this race, because I know a lot of people that are like looking towards the Spine race are wanting to do, like, they now have the Spine Sprint, and then the Challenger, and then the Challenger North, and then the whole Spine. But actually, this race that you've just been doing sounds like a really good introduction as well, because you can do the distance, but without such a heavy pack. And they are probably, it's comparable but slightly easier terrain, I think.
Yeah.
It's kind of like some of the easier parts of something like the Spine. So yeah, definitely sounds like an interesting race, and I'd be surprised if there wasn't a lot of potential Spine people that wouldn't be very interested in doing it.
The option as well in terms of how much you'd carry. So if you were somebody who was aiming to do the full Spine, you could choose to carry all of the kit and still get it under that cut-off.
Yeah.
But again, if you're somebody who was aiming for doing a race like the Dragon's Back, where you're not expected to carry your stove, you're not expected to carry your sleeping mat and sleeping bag, this might be better preparation for something like that than where you're carrying more than you need to.
Yeah, definitely. It's because I'm sure in of itself it's a great event and a great race, but I think it might end up being almost a staging race of people preparing themselves for some of these ones with massive reputations. Yeah.
So from a personal point of view, having had the 100-mile race, obviously I'd managed to get in the time frame that I'd wanted, having the Dragon's Back not go to plan last year. This was a good thing, so I could prove to myself that I could do multi-day stuff without feeling like I'm chasing a cut-off at any real point.
Yeah. No, it definitely sounds like a good choice. And it's 168 miles to 270 kilometres. I mean, that's it's a really serious distance.
Yeah, it's amazing how sort of small boosts like voice notes and messaging people can help during the race. So I had the race organiser message me when I was near the last checkpoint saying that you've got 4k once you've crossed this road to your next sort of food and water stop, and psychologically that's a big boost knowing how far away it is. So when we spoke about what you put on maps, I've never been a big person of marking distances on them, because I quite like the idea of trying to just get through to the next stage and not thinking I've got 4k or 6k left. But yeah, if somebody points it out to you, obviously it's different.
Yeah, well, like you say, it's quite nice when somebody points out that you genuinely are close to something. That's a nice thing. The people say, "Oh, you're nearly there," and you've got like 100 miles to go. It's not helpful. But yeah, again, what we talked about earlier is getting yourself in the moment. So you're not always thinking, "Oh, there's 99 miles to go," or "There's 97 miles to go," or "There's," because it just, for me, it would break me down. Whereas I just think, well, I've got to go across this field, and then I'm going to be coming up to that thing next. Just focus on that.
Yeah.
And just keep moving. I've really got into that recently, where, because I've got my nutrition working well, where I can kind of have constant energy in my body. Not necessarily always having myself at the very top end of energy, but enough energy to keep moving. Then I kind of just don't really, I'm not bothered about how far away it is to the next thing. I know I'm just going to keep moving, and the only time I might kind of look further ahead is, well, how much water have I got? Where's the next stream, kind of thing?
Yeah.
Or where, if I need to collect some water, just as in, am I filling 1 bottle or 3 bottles? So, yeah, if I'm only a few K from the finish, I might just fill 1.
Yeah.
Whereas if I'm further away, I might fill all 3. That's about it. Other than a decision like that, why do I need to know how far it is? Just keep moving till I get there.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of a big psychological thing. I know, like when I was being coached by Javed Bhatti, something we talked about a lot. When you get to that finish line of a race and you kind of collapse in a heap, which you don't do on all races, but you do. I've certainly done on some. And you say, well, what if the finish line wasn't there? How would you feel if it was another mile? And again, I used to have this thing where the last hill was always a big issue. If I was doing a 5k, the last hill was a big issue. If I was doing a 30k, the last hill was a big issue. Because it was the last hill, it was a psychological thing. And to kind of move away from that, and that you're only ever dealing with one hill, this one that I'm on right now, then it's either the first hill or it's the last hill, or it's just a hill.
I think I'd imagine that would be really difficult if you're in a race where, based on the elevation map, you think you're on what you think is the last hill, and then there's a tiny little sort of spike in the tail that you didn't see coming. That could be huge.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I much prefer this, being able to just get into the moment and not and switching off from, well, what's coming, what's been, what's whatever. Doesn't matter.
I think I was quite lucky that I'd planned in terms of at the finish that you are allowed to stay there for 8 hours, presuming you're not 99 hours into the 100-hour race allocation. So knowing that I could eat when I got to the finish, I could have a sit down. It's not going to be a case of I'm going to have to get straight in the car and go home.
Yeah, I think that's really important on properly long events as well. Because I was really lucky when I finished the Spine. I finished just before 8 o'clock in the morning, and my wife was there with the kids to see us finish. And so, it was just a case of sorting myself out enough to be able to get in the car. Probably 2 or 3 hours. But if I'd finished at 2 o'clock in the morning, I didn't expect them to be there. I'd want to be hanging around for 8 hours before I was. So I think it is really important, as you say, to know there's that kind of facility there. That because you really can't predict what time you're going to finish on these crazy things, and you need that option to be able to crash Certainly, I know, like on the Lakeland 100, where I've had the experience of finishing like around 10 o'clock at night, which was great because then just get in my tent and have a sleep. And also finishing more like 4 or 5 in the morning, which is horrible because you just get to sleep and the sun comes up, and when it hits your tent, it's like being in a furnace.
Yeah.
And you got to get out of bed.
Yeah, I think I was quite lucky in terms of the sleep I got after the race, that it didn't mean that my sleep pattern was totally haywire for several days.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, what was it like? Were you able to...
So I think I had overestimated my ability to sit down for half an hour, have something to eat and get straight in the car. So it was quite a hot day, and my mum and dad's car isn't overly big, and obviously I'm not small. So I was advised to have a shower, have a lie down for an hour, and then see how you feel after that. Yeah. And 1 hour turned into about an 8-hour nap. So unfortunately I was wide awake at 2 or 3 in the morning, and managed to get back to sleep a bit before mum and dad came to get me at lunchtime. But yeah, it did even itself out over the next few days that 7 hours sleep in 77 was always going to catch up with me later on.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I know some people get like really big sweats and stuff. Again, when the body's trying to adjust and trying to repair itself, and again, legs are sore. You can get quite disturbed sleep just from the pain.
Yeah,
and things like that as well. But
compared to like how I felt at the finish at the 100-mile race a few years ago, where I couldn't turn to my left, couldn't turn to my right, couldn't sit up. There wasn't any point where I was like that, but it was quite nice that I could gently stretch when I was waiting for mum and dad to pick me up the next morning. That being able to move a bit was far better than hardly being able to move at all.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds good. I mean, again, actually, just after this weekend that I've just done, where I did do 71 miles, I think, in the end, and a lot of elevation. I took the dog for a walk in the evening after I got back, and I think it was that evening, and it was a very slow walk. I didn't go very far, but just moving and just, you know, kind of the body starts to move stuff around. I think it's good, like you say, rather than just getting cramped straight into a small car. Definitely, I don't think it would be very. No. You'd be struggling when you get out of the car. My kids were laughing at me though, because, like I said, I'd had a few hours and then got in the car, and I'd gone to sleep in the car, woken up, and we were just Durham services. So we stopped there, and I was absolutely busting for the toilet. I was trying to hobble across the car park in the services in my flip-flops to get to the toilet. And I was moving really, really slow and trying really, really hard.
Yeah, it was quite nice. Me and mum and dad went for lunch at the Kirby Stephen Cafe, and the toilets are sort of outside around the back. And I think the people who run the cafe noticed I was moving quite gingerly from where we were sat to eat to going to the toilet and then coming back, and we got into a conversation about what the race was that I'd just done. It was quite nice, people taking an interest and stuff like that.
Yeah, it definitely is, and I guess that's the difference between like going to a nice cafe in Kirkby Stephen or stopping off at a motorway services. Motorway services, nobody cares.
Yeah, you've got truck drivers who are in their own little world at that point, haven't you?
Yeah, exactly. So, it's. So a question I'll ask, which I think I understand this side of things, but it's definitely of interest to people that haven't done such long events, is, did you get bored?
I think honestly, no. There wasn't any point where I wasn't focused on where I'm going to next and at what stage of the race I'm in. So I think psychologically, having been last September when I'd last tried anything like this, and this being the only race I'd signed up to for this year, I was always in a zone of I had to make sure that I was moving forwards towards what I was going to be getting to next. Yep.
Yeah, because I was actually having a conversation with somebody last time I did a track session where they said, I don't know how somebody could do a 24-hour track race. And it's not my idea of fun to do. Something I kind of might do sometime though, but I was saying to him, well, in the first 3 or 4 hours, like you were saying, you're going to be really focused on not going too fast. You're going to think about that a lot. And then you're going to be thinking about, like, even though you don't feel hungry or thirsty or whatever early on, you're still going to be thinking about, well, am I eating and drinking enough? I'm going to need later. And then as things get later, you're then going to be thinking about the pain or whatever and what pace you're doing. So even on a track, you're going to be constantly thinking about, like, where are you in what you're trying to achieve, and trying to keep on track. Pardon the pun. Like you say, but when you're out there on the trails, it's kind of even easier that you're even more occupied, constantly thinking about, are you going the right way?
I think
keeping your nav on track.
The terrain side of it as well, that where you're concentrating on where you're placing your feet for part of it, even though it's nowhere near as technical as other races, you are still concentrating more than if it's pancake flat stuff that you don't necessarily have to think about it.
Because you'll get a stretch that's that little bit more technical, and it's easy 1 or 2 hours go where you're just concentrating on your feet. Like I was talking about doing that gable girdle that I did last Saturday. For most of the way around that, it's really quite technical ground, and you are just thinking about, where am I going to put a foot, where am I going to put that hand, where am I going to, is it possible to move any faster here? Am I keeping it safe? Am I definitely still on the main trod here? Have I veered off anywhere? And everything else in the world disappears for that time. Otherwise, that's when you make mistakes in the race, when you start thinking about other things. But it's really it's cool, and it's a type of meditation, and it's people have done brain scans and proved this. When you're in that moment, a lot of people that are doing yoga and things like that, and they talk about mindfulness, and they spend a lot of time trying to get themselves in the moment, because that allows you to let go of all the other stresses that you've got going on. And I keep thinking, well, why don't I just go and run an ultra? Because you have to be in the moment. You have to forget about everything else in order to achieve what you're trying to achieve, and it's a great thing, because I was describing to somebody, a new colleague that I've started working with, and I mentioned to him what I do, and he said something along the lines, you must be like really exhausted after you've done something like that. And I said, well, yes and no. You're physically exhausted, yes, you're mentally tired as well, because you've been thinking all this time, but because you've switched off from all of life's stresses while you've been in that bubble of the race, I also come back quite refreshed.
I think the stuff about type 1 and type 2 decisions as well, that if there's a lot of the stuff you're describing where you've made a similar decision before, you're not necessarily overly thinking what you put into it, that can be far less stressful than if you're in a work situation or a personal situation where you're having to think between several options and what am I going to do.
Absolutely. As you say, I mean, it's just, when you're racing these ultras, you're putting one foot in front of the other, putting that in the right direction, eating, drinking, sleeping. Now, we do all those things anyway, and then have all the extra thoughts and extra stresses on top of that in normal life. So you're really making life far more simple, far more basic, and it's completely natural things to do as well. Walk or run, it's completely natural. Eat, drink, sleep, and think about where you're going. It's completely natural things to do, So, like you say, it takes less energy to do that. I come back from these things really refreshed and ready to face work.
It was quite nice on the drive back the next morning, my dad filling me in on what had happened in the real world over the last 3 days, that sort of maybe not read any newspapers, not been on my phone for longer than, say, 10 minutes, and it was quite nice being caught up with what had actually gone on.
Yeah, you probably think, not a lot. I haven't really missed anything. It is great. I mean, a lot of people talk about it being a race bubble, don't they? And it's just, you only allow a certain amount of input. So, I mean, you just mentioned there you hadn't been on your phone for longer than 10 minutes. I know some people really love getting lots of messages when they're doing long stuff. I like to get some messages, but I tend to just maybe have like 2 WhatsApp groups or something. Basically, one with friends, one with family, and I'll ignore everything else. When I finish, I'll look at my phone. There's hundreds of notifications on there. But I tend to just have, because now and again, it gives you a lift, doesn't it? I like to see the odd message, and I like to know that if there was some kind of crisis at home, I'm not just ignoring the outside world completely. That I would take note of it and might have to make a decision. But I know some people like to switch off completely, and they'll take it like a separate phone that's the absolute, they can make phone calls for emergencies and nothing else. And,
So I think, I was probably in the middle, that because obviously the race had a tracking feature and I knew that there'd be friends and family watching, the people who I thought would be taking interest enough to watch, once I'd got to near the end, I could pretty much trust that they'll trust that I'll be fine. So I wasn't necessarily worried about people worrying about me. And I think similar to what you've described, that although WhatsApp wasn't necessarily something that I'd have used for checking in on, if it was a case of something big had happened, people would ring me. So,
Yeah, I think the reason I've ended up going over to WhatsApp, by the way, that it has a really useful feature in that you can record voice messages on it when you've got no phone signal, and when you get a signal, it'll send them out. That's really useful because it's hard to type on your phone while you're walking or running, so you can do a voice message, and record it and send it. Then in there while you've got no signal, and when it connects later, it'll update it. So that's why I tend to use WhatsApp, because like I say, it'll prepare everything and then send it later, which tends to work quite well when you're in and out of signal.
Yeah, that was quite a nice thing in terms of having to force yourself to be a bit more disciplined for where you take longer rests. So bits of the course where you don't have phone signal, if you can't contact the race organisers to let them know you'll be longer than 45 minutes, you can't be longer than 45 minutes. So you wouldn't want somebody being sent to the bottom of a valley to come and get you because you've not let them know that that's you sleeping on purpose.
Yeah, and again, from a sort of safety point of view, I mean, I've been involved with a rescue of somebody on a race where they were right on the edge of a black spot. And, the race organisers know there's black spots where the trackers will either stop or do strange things, and then they'll suddenly appear. And, they try to keep a bit of an eye on, okay, they're going into the black spot. Expect them out in the black spot in 2-3 hours, whatever it is. Obviously, if you've had an accident early on in that black spot, it could be 4 hours before anybody's raising the alarm, because it's just normal that you're not going to get an update for 3 hours. It's something, like you say, for us to be conscious of as competitors, that we should try and move through those areas just at a steady pace. Because then if something happens, then you're not at the steady pace. The organisers will realise, but it is going to be a period of time. So
I think I was possibly at a big advantage that having 7 of us that started the race, by the point where you're thinking I might have to have a short rest before I move on to the next stage, the race organisers who are tracking you will have a good idea of what pace you normally move at, and they'd pick up on if you weren't moving at that pace, which if it's a race with 40 people next year, people might have to be a bit more self-sufficient in terms of how they manage that.
Yeah, or a bigger event with 1,000 people.
Yeah.
There's no way. Yeah. Organisers can keep track of everybody. Absolutely. I mean, you've had just pretty personalised service with those few people. I think, was it Al Pepper that was out taking photographs as well? Yeah, I know Al. I wasn't very cheerful when I saw him in January. He caught me almost my lowest point on the spine when he came out to take a picture of me.
Yeah, it was really good having him at checkpoints, because you could tell that he knew in terms of the advice he was giving you what he was on about. And
he's a good bloke. He's experienced doing long distance stuff himself. Has volunteered endlessly, and he's in mountain rescue, and he's got a trained search dog as well. He's experienced guy.
There was one of the points where it was meant to be a food and water thing, but you weren't necessarily resting there, and he let me sit in his van, but he wasn't turning the heating on, and I wasn't staying there for very long, which it was useful in terms of me not taking the mick with what he was offering.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just thinking, because it's obviously a new event. What was the rules about outside support?
So the idea that sort of no support's fair for all, that stuff that was offered to everybody you could take. So you could go into a pub, you could go into a post office. You couldn't have people meet you out on the course or anything like that.
Yeah. So the same principle as the spine.
Yeah.
Probably exactly the same wording, because I think Stu wrote it for both.
Yeah.
But yeah, and actually they do the same. Well, in fact, Lakeland 100, you're not allowed any support, even going into places, and that's simply because of the number of people on it and the small villages and stuff you're going through. The race would like swamp.
Yeah.
And I know some of the hardmores are starting to go that way, because they've had issues about too many people descending on small villages as well.
So the Dragon's Back is a similar thing with the overnight camps. It's only the athletes that are allowed in them.
Yeah, and they, again on the Lakeland 3-day that I've just been doing, they actually had like paid security on the camps to make sure nobody else was coming in there. Which it's a shame that you need to do that. But, unfortunately, that's the world we live in. Yeah. Especially while everybody's out of the camp during the day. I think there's a lot of kids sitting around in tents. Yeah,
I think it's if you're not necessarily familiar with the sports, people might underestimate how valuable some of the stuff that's lying in those tents actually is.
Yeah. Well, that's fine. If they don't understand the value, they won't want to touch it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Shall we have a word from our sponsor? Are you sponsoring us, William? My son dancing around behind the camera. Yeah. Yeah, he just thinks I'm crazy going out and doing what I do. Yeah, so it sounds like a good event. Are you going to be back next year?
I've offered that I'll go back as a volunteer. So the guy who I'd ran with through the first night, he dropped out over 200 kilometres in.
Right.
So while it's sort of a very individual decision and you have to accept that that's the best thing for them based on what they've chose, it would be quite nice to see him finish next year.
Yep.
And obviously it's a race that I've got a lot out of and felt like I'd managed to prove something to myself with, so helping other people do that I think would be really valuable as well.
Yeah. No, yeah, definitely. I'm kind of similar with events that I like the Lakeland 100, for example, which I love. Well, I'm not doing this year because it's too close to the Dragon's Back. I've been trying to get on the volunteer roster. Yeah. That's full of volunteers. Which is a shame.
I think it can be quite nice as well that if there's a small community of people that you're working with for a couple of days, it breaks up your sort of routines as well. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. So that's what I didn't ask. Out of the 7 that started, how many finished?
3. So yeah, I had the first time I've ever got a first in age category, the first time I've ever come third, and the first time I've ever come last, all in one race.
Yeah. No, very good. Yeah, I did win a race once that there was only about 4 people started. So I have done something similar. Yeah. I think
I think from a sort of logistics point of view, I was quite glad that I was the last one in terms of, I think if there had been people closer to the 100 hours, that would have been a lot in terms of the first year this race has been ran, and it would have meant a lot for people to be able to tie things up at the end.
Yeah, as you say, this. I mean, because again, I mentioned I was helping out on Snowdonia Trail Ultra recently, and there was a few people had to be timed out on that, and there's some people really dislike having cut-offs there, but as you say, people are volunteering to be in these locations, sometimes out in the cold and the wet and things like that. Those people are getting tired and potentially at risk, and I think any race that doesn't have clear cut-offs is making a mistake, personally, because you have to think about the safety of your volunteers. So as you say, if everybody can finish well inside the cut-offs, it's a bonus for those volunteers. They can go home a bit earlier than they expected.
Yeah.
Which is definitely a good thing.
I think it is showing a boundary between the race organisers' support for your endeavour and what you would be willing to do on your own.
Yeah, very much so, because volunteers can't just be out there indefinitely. They might even have like other lives they have to get back to.
Yeah.
Who knows? Yeah. All tend to be a bit crazy, and because obviously when you get involved with support and things like Bob Graham's and things like that, and then people's schedules, start to get behind schedule. There's some tough decisions for people as to whether they can stay or not, and it's very awkward.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of the time if you're the athlete who's in the bubble, it's pretty dangerous to sometimes assume that everybody else can be in that bubble with you.
Yeah, exactly. That's why, in some ways it's, I found it very hard when I first kind of got into the sport because there's so many rules and they're kind of complicated with kit lists and cut-offs and what the expectation is with the clothing you're wearing and everything else. And then, I think once you get into it, race to race, there's a lot of commonality between these things. And you just, when you enter the next race with a different company, you're just checking, well, what's different from what I usually do? And there's always some small differences there. But yeah, the rules are there at the time when you sign up. They shouldn't change. And if you don't like them, don't sign up. But it's those rules define your bubble. Because when it's a race where you can have support runners or whatever else, well, then your bubble extends to those friends that are going to come and support you on it. And if it's a race where there's no support, then it's kind of like a smaller, tighter bubble. Yeah. But you end up with a closer relationship then with the volunteers on the race. So certainly that way on the Spine, people talk about the Spine family, and you get to know these volunteers because you're not allowed anybody else to help you. So you have more of a relationship with them, whereas on another event when you've got other friends coming in or whatever to meet you at certain points, well, they're your bubble.
I think there's something quite nice about that as well, where it's people that you don't know, that if it's a family member or a friend that you think will be worried about you seeing you move at 4 kilometres an hour and looking in a bad way, if it's somebody that doesn't know you, you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, again, like my wife's only come to support me during a race once, I think. She's popped out to see me. It tends to be earlier on when the pace is a bit more predictable. So it's a bit easier to organise. But yeah, my first Hardmoor 60, she came along and met me at a few of the checkpoints, which was great. But yeah, I actually prefer, like you say, if you're doing something long, like when I did a self-organised 100-miler, the people that were coming out to support me on that were people that understood.
Yeah.
And yeah, if they saw me hobbling or whatever, they weren't panicking about it. Actually, yeah, my wife did come to my last checkpoint, but that was very important because I wanted to change into some softer shoes because my feet were hurting so much.
Yeah, I think the idea of people checking that you're okay, that it's a very individual thing, that if you're telling them that you're okay, you genuinely feel like you are, and they might be worried that you're not. But
yeah, I mean, because again, what is okay? It's relative to normal daily life of most people in the country. You're definitely not okay.
Yeah.
But compared to how you expected to be at that stage of that event, you probably are okay.
Yeah, I think there's a psychological side of it as well. If you're intending to push yourself a bit in the race and you're getting to a point where you are feeling like you're doing that, that can be far better than if you've finished an entire race and you've not left second gear.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you say, you have those expectations on yourself, don't you? I mean, because like the event I've just done this weekend, where there was 4 different classes of route that I could take, and I knew certainly the first 2 I'd feel like I hadn't done enough.
Yeah.
The third into the Wain right long, I'd be thinking, okay, that's a good time, but could I have done more? And so I took on the expert, knowing that I'm really going to be pushing some limits here, pushing some boundaries. And so even though tendinitis came on the 3rd day and I decided to not push any further because I didn't want to have to take a chunk of time out from running for the injury, I feel like I achieved a lot on the 2 and a bit days compared to if I'd chosen an easier route, then I wouldn't have had that kind of same experience and satisfaction. But yeah, I mean, like when I finished the second day, it was great that I had friends there that were like, well, do you want to go to your tent and take your shoes off and I'll go and order a pizza for you? Oh, yes. Jim, you're a legend. That kind of stuff. It's brilliant when, like you say, when people understand and recognise that you have pushed yourself, you are a bit broken, and, just a little bit of help like that can really lift you. So.
Yeah, I think a big thing as well for me with races is that I want to feel like I'm trying something that I've not done before.
Yeah.
And you do try and seek that out quite a bit.
Yeah, and again, it's quite difficult, like you say, when you hadn't been able to get all the way through the Dragon's Back last year, yet you still want to go and take on a new challenge. You don't just want to feel like you're stepping backwards.
Yeah.
As well, that's a difficult thing. I know, because I've been there myself.
Yeah.
It's a difficult thing to try and get the right level of challenge as well. So I think you've done really well with that. To take on something that's really significant distance, but that less technical kind of element to it, and then succeeded at it. It's brilliant, really.
Yeah, thank you. I'm hoping that the thing that I'm going to try next year, even though it's slightly shorter in terms of distance, it will be a higher proportion of running than walking/hiking/running. But yeah, I think it's something that the cut-off is a lot tighter, so I would have to make sure that I could run the vast majority of it.
Are you ready to see what it is?
So the Viking Way Ultra is what I'm looking at doing next year.
The Viking Way Ultra. Is that one of
Cockbane events?
Yeah. Yeah, one of the Cockbane events. So those cut-offs tend to be very tight.
So 40 hours for 147 miles?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not going to be able to be plodding on at 4k an hour and getting to the end of that.
No, that's what makes his events like that very tough, is the cut-offs. I know good people that haven't made the cut-offs on his events. The Viking Way does look interesting. I have looked at it myself. But yeah, I think you'll do well at it. It's hard to say that anybody will meet his cut-offs, to be honest, because they are tight.
Yeah. I'm working over in that direction now as well, so being able to recce some of the course after work, and I think that will help in terms of being able to know where I'm going and stuff.
Yeah, it'll be interesting, sort of slight variation on nutrition as well. I think that's one of the things I'd be very conscious of trying to maintain that pace over that kind of distance. Nutrition becomes really, really important.
Yeah.
So I definitely say, obviously you've got a great base because you've managed to have your nutrition working over the distance, and like you said, it's slightly shorter, so that's excellent. But it's like the calories per hour that you're putting in, you're probably going to want to try and increase that somehow.
Yeah.
It's an interesting challenge.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, it was one of those that did take a week or two to think about it after the race, but that does seem like the logical next one to move towards.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely an interesting one. Is there any support allowed on that one? Is it?
I don't believe so.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect so. No one who's organising it. That'll definitely be interesting. It's some interesting dot watching. Your dot should be moving pretty quick.
I can't imagine many dots on that screen either. From previous events, it's been quite a small amount of people that entered.
Yeah, because they are very tough. And surprisingly few people are willing to take on those challenges where they don't know whether they can do it or not. A lot of people, although all of these events have high dropout rates. Like you say, 7 if you start, 3 if you finish. That's kind of normal dropout rate on these kinds of things. A lot of people are trying to kind of stay a bit predictable, a bit within the comfort zones. So, yeah, good on you. That's definitely a good undertaking. So yeah, right. Well, that's looking towards the future, which is great. Shall we leave it there?
Yeah, sure.
I'm going to have a bit of editing to do with a couple of disruptions. So thanks very much, Martin.
I appreciate you having me on.
It's always a pleasure to see you. Anyway, now that COVID is kind of over, things are open again. I've really enjoyed having a face-to-face podcast rather than another Zoom one.
Yeah. Yeah, it does feel a bit easier to have the conversation rather than looking through a screen for the length of time we've been on.
Yeah, well, that's it. I'm looking at screens all day long at work, so it is nice to see you in person.
Yeah. Thank you, Kev.
Thanks a lot.